the styling and maintenance at home for your clients. So I'll give it to you, Sarah.
Awesome. Okay. So just right off the bat, I wanted to show one of the differences between hand tied and conceal or the coveted weft. And that's that the coveted weft does not have any return hair or the mustache. So you can see that this is a hand tied, really nice and flexible, really thin top versus the coveted weft. There's no return hair, and it actually has a higher density per weft. So also really nice, flexible, thin top. But just like Katina said, you can cut it anywhere. So I wanted to show you how to cut the two wefts separately, just kind of depending on your client's head size. So I have my little handy dandy girl here. So especially mannequin has a little small head, but when you're placing your weft, if it ends up being too wide for your extension or for your row, you can cut it at any point. So I'll just, for purposes, show cutting it right in half. And I wanted to show just with the coveted wefts, just be mindful because of the way that they're constructed, you don't want to waste hair. So I like to kind of split the weft in half and just try to avoid cutting at any sort of diagonal because then you will lose some of that hair from there. But it's great because it will not unravel, super customizable versus our hand tied, which is also super customizable. You do have the cut point technology, so we can choose to cut here or here. You just want to make sure that when you are cutting these, you're cutting before this knot here essentially, because anything past it will unravel to here, and anything past this one, you'll kind of start to lose your actual weft. So this one, because we're not saving this side, we don't have to be quite as mindful, but you can see here that we were able to change the width of that weft super easily. So one of the other points of difference between the two wefts is just the way that the colors are blended, specifically the wefts that have like the piano key, so are unrooted. The way that the coveted wefts are constructed, you can see the body of the two really look the same. Obviously, when you have dimension in there, it really blends through like the mids and ends, but the top of hand tied tends to look much more like piano key. Definitely want to root that. Whereas the top of the coveted wefts tend to be softer, more blended, and not quite as like intensely uniform. And it just tends to be a little softer, which is a great little perk. What's also nice is placement wise, if you're, needing this to come right around the front, if you're not wanting that low light there, you're even wanting like a skinny little low light, you can cut the weft exactly where you need it instead of having to look for exactly where the cut point technology is. Same thing on this side. If like, let's say that this is too harsh of a money piece and you want just like a really skinny little one, you can cut it right there and you still have plenty of weft left. So one of the questions that were asked is, does one last longer than the other? And I want to say yes and no. So a lot of this we know is based off of client care at home. So we all have those clients who do have a hard time with that home care, no matter what, they're blasting it with heat. Maybe they're not brushing particularly well. They're using product that has protein. So no matter what, that hair is probably not going to last. However, when you have those clients who they take care of the body of the hair, but the top of the weft always comes back swollen, or maybe they've broken it at a point, or, they are just rougher when it comes to brushing. Those clients are a great fit for the coveted weft because they don't have to blow dry them in entirety. In fact, with a lot of my coveted weft clients, I tell them they are totally fine to completely air dry. So that is super great for that client, either who has like naturally wavy hair or the client who's just lazy. That's me. I'm that person. But you never have to worry about it swelling. It's also good for clients who like to go swimming. Because as we know with the hand-tied hair, if we do leave the top of the weft wet for too long, those threads can swell and then it becomes much more fragile. And let's say we have tangling going on, especially with like the return hair, and they're brushing through when it's wet and still fragile, they can snap one of the threads or just start to like unloop hair. And that definitely shortens the lifespan. On the other side, for our clients who are heavy heat styling users, it's really important to instruct them with the coveted wefts that there is an adhesive portion to this. So if you were to overheat the weft, let's say blow drying or flat ironing like right by the scalp, which is rare, but it does happen, excess heat can cause these to warm up and the adhesive to slightly let go, and you can cause shedding and actually see just like sections of hair coming out. The nice thing about these is, let's say like here you had that loss and the rest of the body of the weft is okay. If they were to come back, just make sure that you're communicating with them about home care and you can snip this off and still save the weft. Always trying to think about ways, especially in this economy, to provide clients with the best possible solutions, just because this is a big investment and it's our job to make sure that they're caring for them properly. So hopefully that answers that question. Yes and no. I've had clients who had success and kept their wefts in both methods for a year plus. But I think the majority of clients who we all have like issues with, who are constant, having to replace hair, those people tend to be the ones who come back with swollen wefts at the top. And when I've switched them over to the coveted wefts, they're much more successful with being able to care for their hair at home, because it's not so much the issue with heat styling or like tangling down here, it's more so the top. And I definitely, while the cost is different, I kind of make sure that it evens out because they're making their hair last so much longer. So that investment definitely is worth it to them. So yeah, something to think about for that. So just like with hand-tied hair, these are completely customizable when it comes to color. That is one of my favorite parts of the service. And I think a lot of people are becoming really passionate about custom coloring wefts for clients. And so actually one of the ones that I just cut in half is our coveted weft that I custom colored. It started off as the Amalfi, and there are just a few of the coveted wefts that have this lighter top here. So something to keep in mind is this does not accept color. I've seen some people on the internet using like markers to cover it. I don't think that's a great idea. So just being mindful, like this could be a great weft to like sandwich in between two others, just to, if that is going to be an issue. But for our really light girlies, it's not quite as much of an issue. But you'll find that the other wefts that are pre-rooted, or the Laguna baby root, is perfect. It does have a light brown base. So if you were to color the wefts deeper, and then add dimension and whatnot into the baby root, you are good to go and you already have a brown base.
Is there ever a time that you'll mix hand-tied and coveted wefts together?
Absolutely. I do it really frequently. Either if a full head of coveted wefts is not in a client's budget, but I feel that they would benefit from it, or if they've worn some coveted wefts and they love the comfort. For me, I love the no mustache aspect of it. Also, the being able to air dry my hair is super great. But once you've experienced not having that mustache against your scalp, it's hard to go back. I tried and I couldn't. So what I like to do for those people is, when we're doing the concealed method, obviously we have wefts on the underneath and wefts on the top. It's covered completely beadwise. So even if, let's say, only 2 wefts are in their budget for like the entire deposit, you can take 2 and place them kind of along the nape underneath. And then you can either choose to fold over using the hand-tied wefts, or you can do 2 and 2 and then meet the wefts up at the front corner. So here and here, say there's a bead, there's your front bead right here. These 2 meet up exactly perfectly. So that is a great way to mix the two. It's also great if, let's say, texture wise, you're wanting to mix in more of the textured line, but you're wanting the benefits of the coveted weft. But let's say the beach wave isn't quite fluffy enough for your client. You can do beach wave, and then you can add a couple of the textured hand-tied wefts into the back of it, just to like fluff the back of the hair up and help kind of support that wave. So there's a lot of ways that you can be really creative when it comes to combining the two. It's also great for if you have somebody who is like pretty firmly a hand-tied client, that's totally fine. I have those clients who, that's just their preference, especially when it comes to the cost, but they're wanting to do like a fun pop of color with the hand-tied hair. Well, you can cut it and glue it. It definitely doesn't stay. And sometimes the glue can like alter the front of the hair there and look a little bit gunky. You could simply just sell them one single coveted weft, cut it in half, and use that to place for like your fun pops, whether it be like vivids or super intense, platinum hair. So there's a lot of ways that you can mix the two together. That's really fun and kind of ends up being the best fit for your client, depending on their budget and their home life and whatnot. So the big other thing that's a point of difference between the two is that the coveted wefts actually have a lot more hair per weft. So because of that, you can either have less wefts per row, or if your client likes to wear a lot of hair, you can place a little bit of extra coveted wefts on a row, and then they can cheat a lot more hair, which is also why the cost is different. But you do want to be mindful. One thing that I've found when it comes to, I personally don't recommend ever placing more than 5 coveted wefts per row. When you have this much density of hair, specifically at the top of the weft, like you can just kind of see how dense that is. Even though there's not the return hair that can cause tangling in that aspect, when you have that much hair stacked on top of each other, hopefully you can kind of see the point of difference between the two. You can actually get tangling just from there being so much hair, especially if you're wearing 2 rows and you have the natural hair kind of in there. It can be hard for clients to get their brush through. So personally, I don't put more than 5 wefts on a row, and generally I'm doing 5 coveted wefts, 4 to 5 coveted wefts in a 1 row, and then I'm doing 8 max usually of coveted wefts on 2 rows. You can, with the way that the 2.0 weft is with the coveted, they are a little longer than they were when they first came out in like the 30-inch. Those were 10 inches, and I believe this is 12.
I think it's 11.5 because
11.5. So the exact same as the hand tied. Because, and it's funny how that does make a difference when it comes to kind of the placement of the weft. So if a client has really low density hair and you're wanting to match that, or you just feel like home care wise, maybe they're not going to be the best fit for 8 full wefts, you can make 7 work. You just can cut the wefts and kind of place them around. Of course, speaking about when we're doing a concealed method, just because we need hair underneath and on top. But generally, most people's bottom rows are shorter rows, so you can place 3 down there. And then most people's top rows are wider, so you can place 4 on there. So if that's a better texture fit for somebody, or placement, or I'm sorry, density fit, then that's something that you can customize also. On the other hand, with hand-tied hair, generally 5 to 6 wefts is max for a 1 row for us. And then 9 to 10 is like complete max when it comes to 2 rows. There are those people who love to wear a lot of hair. We all have those clients. And then, but what's also nice is because the wefts are longer, you can cheat. So the least amount of wefts that I will do per row is 3. So we do have those clients certainly who just have a really low density, and or maybe their scalps are on the squishy side, so they just can't support the weight of more than 3. So the 18-inch coveted wefts, I believe, have 4 more grams per weft. I think it's 20 grams per weft versus 16 in the hand tied. And then the 22 inches have 26 grams of hair per weft in the coveted wefts, and then 19 in hand tied. So just kind of be mindful about doing the math there, because you can end up with a lot more hair than you expect. And then just want to be mindful about keeping that healthy for the client's head. So I kind of went over this earlier, picking up some of the hair, about blow drying and heat when it comes to the extension hair. In my salon, we work with assistants. So a lot of times they are the ones who are blow drying for us, but then also directing clients who maybe are going to get a blowout at another salon or going on vacation or just taking care of their hair themselves. So you definitely can overdo it when it comes to heat on the top of these wefts with the coveted. The other thing that personally I prefer is for the majority of the blow drying be done held by the assistant because of the density of these, when you place them on the little blow dry racks, they do tend to split pretty hard just because there's not like a really great place for them. You can see just there's a lot of density up there. So sometimes then they'll come to you like with little splits in between, and that drives me crazy. So I always ask my assistants to try to like mostly get it blow dried, at least on the top of it, just holding it. But then that's also going to prevent them from potentially putting the blow dryer directly down. So something to talk to clients about, just being careful when they are blow drying to focus the heat on the hair itself as opposed to the top of the weft versus hand tied hair. Obviously, if you were to blow dry them or even wash them upside down, you can force the return hair to push up and end up either with matting, especially if it's hair that has already been used. So it's already, got a little bit of process on it. So you can cause matting, but then also you want to direct your assistants and clients to make sure when they are blow drying, they're blow drying directly down. So the blow dryer is pointing straight down and we're getting all of those return hairs really nice and sealed. Something that I always like to teach them is like after I personally prefer that there's only 2 to 3 wefts being dried at a time on the rack. So placing them and then going in with a comb and brushing them down, it really does make a big difference when it comes to like your own personal installation. And sometimes when you send a client out with like some crazy return hairs, it's setting them up for failure when it comes to that home care. But it is important to make sure that the top of these wefts are completely dry. So, every once in a while, if there's a need for it, but, for the most part, when it comes to that home care, just make sure that they are actually getting the top of the weft dry. There's no adhesive for them to have to worry about when it comes to the construction. So it's honestly kind of the opposite of the two. I would say honestly, like heat styling and all of everything besides blow drying, treating them the same. Some of this is like the cut that you're doing, obviously, when you're doing your install with the two, because there is a lot more density when you do a coveted installation. So if people are having issues with the weight of it, just being mindful when you're doing the cut about adding enough texture in. So I would say ideal clients for one versus the other. Generally, while we love the no mustache aspect of the coveted wefts, the hand tied hair is lighter and it is a little bit more flexible when it comes to doing a fold over. So thinking of those clients who have borderline see-through hair where you can kind of see the scalp, they tend to be really rough on themselves when they're brushing. So maybe they come in with a slip bead or two, or just in general, their scalps are reactive, squishy, just, not overall a great fit for a lot of weight. Those are the clients that we're doing all hand tied or potentially one coveted weft underneath and then hand tied around, because you can go down to just 3 wefts with the coveted on a row. That ends up being with the hand tied in a row, that ends up being a really good fit for them versus most clients can be a fit for the coveted wefts. I would say most clients do well with all. The client who is your constant trouble of coming back, having maybe like matting at the return hair or swelling at the top of the weft, or somebody who's just honest with you and is like, I'm not going to blow dry my hair. Like I'm just almost never going to. Totally fine. We've got the solution for you. But the other thing to kind of use in your language that I do, because there is a big price point difference between the two, especially when it comes into the 22-inch wefts, is the coveted wefts are like the ultimate luxury. So that is something that I market. You have those clients who you say that, and that's all they want. Like they don't need to know anything else about it. They're like, those are the best. Okay, great. That's what I want. So, framing it as this, and letting them know a lot of times those tend to be people who maybe are switching out their hair pretty frequently because they want new hair constantly. Because of how much hair is in a coveted weft, they do get that like really strong perimeter feel, which is what a lot of people really love, especially like once you put layers into it, it's that blowouty kind of look. So those clients are great people to kind of market these into. And then again, people who have tons and tons of hair who you really do need to pack in, and or people who maybe you're having to put in a mini row or 3 rows to be able to kind of cover everything. You can have less wefts per row on the coveted wefts and still get all of that hair that you need. It's a little bit more comfortable, especially for that mini row, to have a hair that, or have wefts that don't have the return hair. That can be really, really helpful, just for general comfort and getting that completely dry, because a lot of times it's that like little row in the middle that's hard for them to get completely dry, no matter how beautiful and clean of like a job you do or how big their skull happens to be. So at least that one, you know, isn't going to stay wet for a long time and end up swelling and falling apart. I'm definitely excited to start adding the beach wave into our coveted inventory here at the salon, especially again, a lot of people who wear their hair wavy like to air dry, and they tend to get like the best texture that way. So it's going to be great to be able to transition some of those people into the coveted wefts and enjoy the benefits of that. So a couple of my personal pro tips that I like to share when it comes to coloring the 2 wefts themselves, or the 2 different types of hair. I find that as long as you're formulating correctly for coverage, you can get nice coverage with both. However, if you are significantly changing the tone of the coveted wefts, let's say you're wanting them to be really golden blonde, or you're taking double into much more of like a really high intensity copper, you definitely need to clarify the wefts themselves. They're so dense. I keep on saying dense, but it is true. They're so dense that sometimes it's tough to get that color just to be really consistent. Be prepared to definitely take the time to shampoo. We have like the Undo Goo from Malibu here. And then there's a couple of other brands that have great cleansing. So something that's going to help remove, that you would ideally use to remove like minerals, anything like that, just to get a really clean slate. And sometimes we do end up having to fill twice with these. Once they come back, they tend to be really consistent with coverage and accepting color. Always make sure that your formula is processing for that full processing time. These ones are not like a put it on for 5 minutes and rinse, because you're going to really see nothing. Versus the hand-tied wefts, I definitely feel that, with the exception of maybe some of the colors on the base, they take exactly as you would expect. These are a little bit more user-friendly. They also, because there's not as much hair, it tends to be a little more user-friendly when it comes to an all-over gloss, and not getting like any lines or splotchiness when it comes to that coverage. So that would be my like #1 tip, just from having learned myself and learning pains.
What
The other,
color,
pardon?
what color line do you use?
I use Redken, so we use Redken Shade ZQ when it comes to glossing. I do a lot of my roots with permanent color. I use color gels. So we do that with 10 volume. And then this is like a little sneaky bend the rules, but with a couple of my like redheads or deeper brunettes that have a lot of warmth to them, sometimes if a weft can come back looking a little too dark, I will formulate and do 20 volume, and it will lift the base a little bit. So when you're wanting to expose warmth, that is like a little trick. Don't want to do that over and over again, but it definitely works. So in both of these, I just did 7N melted into 9N. And obviously these are actually 2 different colors. I think these are 22 or 24 to 22A. Yeah, I think that's right. And then this is a mauvey. So like slightly different tone wise, but the base, you know, is the same level, and then melt wise the same. And these actually, I put these on before a meeting, and then these sat for a little longer. But what's nice is, you know, they're not overly porous, so they're not going to grab anything too dark. So these were able to process for like 35 minutes, and they were fine once we shampooed them. So then this is only just personal preference, something that I found success with, again, because I am doing a concealed method. Generally, you're doing a lot of foldovers. When I'm using my coveted wefts and it's a whole head of coveted, I actually don't fold these over. I do, even though especially with the 2.0, these are much more flexible than they were before. There's just something about like the seam here where sometimes it's hard to pinch it to get to stay completely flat. And it is, everything is so minute when it comes to extensions that it's just that little bit of the weft sometimes can be too much on that front bead, especially if, you have a higher angle install or a lot of hair per weft or per row. So kind of like I was saying earlier, I do meet my two wefts together. So I just place the two corners on either side, underneath and on the top, and meet them together. And sometimes having that fold over is nice creatively when it comes to custom coloring the extensions. So you can create the same thing, just cut it. So that's the great thing about these is you can cut them literally anywhere. Same thing if like maybe it comes back and like an assistant did a little bit too big of a low light in an area, just cut it off. It's totally fine. So yeah, those are a couple of my main pro tips when it comes to utilizing the two in the salon. And yeah, I don't know if we had any questions.
No questions have come in, but I feel like it's super helpful to see that you can use both wefts at the same time on the same client, really
Absolutely.
talk through who coveted weft is for, who hand tied is for, and just knowing the difference between the tops of the wefts and how to blow dry them and styling. So I found this session super helpful, and I feel like a lot of our newer stylists that are coming into the Covet Collective will find it helpful as well, just learning different wefts that we offer.
Yes. Yeah, there's so much out there, so much customized options, and it's so nice to just to be able to be really creative when it comes to your installs. So yeah.
And as Sarah mentioned, our hand-tied wefts are available in our Silky Straight, our Beach Wave, and our Textures line. Whereas for the coveted weft, it's for Silky Straight and just our Beach Wave. We haven't gotten there with our textures just yet, but it's super exciting to be able to mix Silky Straight with our Beach Wave and get to play around with placement and styling too.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Sarah, so much for jumping on and sharing your wealth of knowledge with
Of
our
course.
And then next week, we will have our founder and CEO, Dafina Smith, on, and she'll be diving into all things textures. And you won't want to miss that session. We are launching a few new colors, so stay tuned for that.
Yeah.
Well, I hope everyone has a great rest of your Monday. And again, thank you, Sarah, for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy Monday.
Monday. Bye.